A reading of Psalm 133. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down upon the beard, on the beard of Aaron, running down over the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion, for there God ordained a blessing, life forevermore. A reading from the New Testament book of Romans, the 12th chapter. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body, we have many members, and not all the members have the same function. So we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members one of another. We have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Prophecy in proportion to faith, ministry in ministry, the teacher in teaching, the exhorter in exhortation, the giver in generosity, the leader in diligence, the compassionate in cheerfulness. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal, be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks.
Good morning, my St. Anthony Park people. It is such a delight to be here this morning and back in Minnesota. It has been 1 year as of today since I left to move to Wisconsin, so kind of fun to be back. I'm also privileged to have been asked to preach this morning, so thank you. I'll start by saying this, and many of you know this. Anytime I've written a sermon, or if any of you have written a story or started a project, often the best laid plans kind of go and shift and you're not really sure where it's going to end up, right? So my whole theme was talking about like Christian unity and things like that. But of course the Spirit led me in a different direction about a week ago. I was thinking this idea of beloved community, and my focus was sort of on the community unity part. This past Thursday, though, I was asked to do a funeral for a patient of mine in hospice in Door County. And the thing about this patient that was so interesting is that she spoke no English. She was a Polish Catholic, as almost all of my patients are in Wisconsin. But every time I would visit her, she had this prayer on the back of her, behind her bed, and it was in Polish, and it was called God's Beloved. And I would look at it all the time, and I would have her recite it, and I never knew what it meant. I never really asked her to translate, since she was minimally verbal. But when she passed away, I was asked to do the funeral, and so I found a translation of it, and what an incredible, powerful, tear, thought-provoking prayer. And it got me to thinking, beloved. What does it mean then to be beloved? So that's what I want to talk mostly about this morning, is beloved. Henry Nouwen is a Dutch Catholic priest who I actually had the privilege of meeting when I worked in the L'Arche community back in college. In his book, Life of the Beloved, he says that from the moment we can claim the truth of us being the beloved, we are faced with the call to become who we are. Becoming the beloved is the greatest spiritual journey we have to make. But this requires a shift in our thinking. Nouwen says that the question we often ask ourselves, and I would agree, is that we're always asking, who are we? Who am I? What's my purpose in this world? Because I think that's the question that we all have throughout our lifetime. that we're trying to always answer. As our life changes, as we go through changes, as we transition, we ask, who are we? And there are three things that he says we often respond to in a way. When we ask, who am I? The first thing we often say is, it's what we do. So when somebody says, well, who are you, or what do you do? That's usually the first question. And I might say, well, I'm a clergy person, I'm a UCC, I'm a Taurus, whatever. Now I feel like I'm putting a Match.com thing out there, but I like long walks in the park. Anyway, I haven't changed, so. But it's a good thing, right? Like that's how we are trained, what it is what we do. That's how we describe ourselves often. And we often say that we are also what we do when we do good. So when I do good things, and when I have a little success in our life, then I feel good about myself. But what happens when I fail? Well, then I start to get a little low or depressed, and my whole identity changes, and I don't feel good about myself. And when we get older, we might say, I can't do this anymore. I retire. I don't have the same abilities that I used to have. I can't use the books that I read. I can't go out and travel anymore. All of the things that I describe myself as what I do, we lose. We all lose that. So then that leaves us with, then who am I? And the second thing he says that we often respond with is, we are what people say we are. What do people say about you? See, what others say, I think, is very powerful. Many of you have maybe had the similar experience where you do a project or preach a sermon, like I have, and everybody can say all kinds of good things, but if there's one person that critiques or says something negative, that's the one I remember, and it's hurtful. If people speak well about you, you can walk around quite freely. But when somebody starts talking about behind your back, or if somebody says something negative, then we start to feel really sad. And that can cut us pretty deep in our hearts. And it's fragile. If the question of who we are is answered with what people say that we are, boy, that gives other people a lot of power. But it's true. And the third thing that we might also say is, I am what I have. Well, I have a house. I have great families. I have friends. I have a good education, United Seminary. Molly, thank you. I have good health. I have a lot of things. But when I start to lose those things, if I lose a family member or a friend, or if I lose my house, if I lose things, my health, my ability to do things, those things that are so important to me, then what am I left with? And at the end, I'm left with an emptiness. We put a lot of energy quite often into thinking about the way that we are by what I do, what people say about me, and what we have. And you know, when that's the case, our life can become quickly like this. Because when people speak well about me, and when I have a lot of good things, and when I do good things, I can feel pretty good. But when I start to lose those things, suddenly I find out that I can't do things anymore. My body's changed, my mind has changed, my job has changed. If people are talking against me, I might start to feel pretty low about myself. And then before we realize it, we're sort of up and down, and our entire energy is being focused on not being low, on making sure that we are these things that we say we are. And now one will say that's called just surviving. We're trying to stay above the line, just surviving. And he says this is all wrong. This is all wrong. And that is because, as Jesus has told us, that is not who we are. That is not who I am. That is not who we are as a community. But that is what the demon said to Jesus when he went in the desert. He says, turn these stones into bread and show you can do something. Prove to us that you are who you are. Jump from the temple and let people catch you and show you can do something. Perform a miracle and show us that you are who you are. Kneel in front of me, and then I will give you a lot of possessions. Then you are loved because you do something, people love you and speak well of you, and you have something, and everybody's going to love you. But Jesus also says that is a lie. That is the greatest lie. Because Jesus says, I know who I am. I know who I am because before the Spirit sent me, the Spirit came upon me and said, you are the beloved child. You are my beloved Son. On you my favor rests. Jesus tells us that's who we are too. That is who you are, that is who I am, and that is who our community is, the beloved. And Jesus heard that voice from God that says, you are my beloved, on you my favor rests. And it was that voice that he clung on to as he lived his life with people praising him and people rejecting him. And the people that said Hosanna and people that crucified him. He always knew who he was. Beloved child of God. Not because people said good things all the time, and not because he did good things and had good things. Jesus always knew, I am the beloved, not because people say I'm great, but because I am the beloved, even before I was born and will be for all of eternity. And Jesus tells us that's who we are as well. In the scriptures, we are told that God said, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have written your name in the palm of my hand from all eternity. You are mine and I am yours, and you belong to me. That is amazing, isn't it? And I think that if we can continue to hear that voice and play that over and over, to know that we are beloved, just as Jesus saw himself as beloved, we start to sort of live the life of the beloved. Live the life of the beloved. It sounds good. Because when we live the life of beloved, we know who we are. We know who we are. And we're no longer that person searching for our identity, no longer looking for what I do and what I have and what people say about me. We will live a life of pain and live a life of anguish and live a life of successes and live a life of failures. But we do this as the one who knows who we are. And you will see that this is who every single person is, the beloved. Now, one also talks about being the voice of the first voice of God, that love, that understanding oneself as being the beloved is our first love. John writes, love one another because God has loved you first. And the great struggle, I think, is that we have to claim this. We have to claim ourselves as being beloved, no matter who we are, no matter what we've done. And it isn't easy. To claim that first love and to live into the life of the beloved is complicated and very simple. God says we are loved first by God before anybody else has loved us. Before our parents, before our siblings, before our friends and our church community have loved us. God loved us first. The people that love us after God's love may not be the people that love us well or know how to love us very well. The people who care for us also wound us the most. And you might know from some experience that those who are closest to you, a parent, a mom, a dad, a child, a sibling, a teacher, or church. They are the ones who might also hurt you the most. When we start to claim and live the life of the beloved, however, we learn to reclaim that first love so that we can forgive those who love us poorly, and we can recognize in the love that we do and the love that we receive that we can start to see God's beloved in everybody. And that doesn't mean a utopian community where everybody gets along. And it certainly doesn't mean just seeing the beloved in people that are easy to see it in. And that's the hard thing for me, and maybe for some of you. Claiming that first love every day, living a life of the beloved, means holding on to that glimpse of what that feels like, how real that love is that God has for us. And that means that any temptation to become bitter, jealous, to lash out, to feel rejected, and to judge others means that we can get over that. We can work past that, because when we embrace and claim the beloved and start to live that life, we can handle all of that. That is the only way that we treat others, is out of our belovedness, we see the beloved in others. And again, I'll say, I think that God's promise of this, of God's love, is that then we go out in the world to love others. And again, not the ones that are easy to love. It is not easy sometimes to even claim our own belovedness, but to see everybody else, every single person, as God's beloved. But together, this is what creates, I think, a beloved community. Because understanding oneself as beloved and claiming that, through community, we will begin to see the beloved in everybody. We start to live this life of the beloved. And I want to say, and I think I believe this, but just that constant claiming of God's beloved children, that I am the daughter of God, that you are the son of God, that we are all God's beloved. I think that's pretty powerful. And I think in a world where there's so much tragedy and violence, and it sometimes feels completely hopeless and we don't know what to do, I think there's a lot of power in claiming the belovedness and seeing that in other people, even if it's on a small scale. And again, I don't think this is easy, though it seems simple to me at times. Beloved. I'm beloved, you are beloved. But that is hard. And I'm going to tell you a story about this. I was working at the prison in Stillwater, co-teaching a class on Franciscan spirituality with an inmate who I had met about 1.5 years earlier. And this was our second course that we were teaching together. So I'd known him for about 1.5 years. I'm going to call him Chris. Chris and I would meet regularly every Monday to plan out the course, make sure the materials were printed and copied, and do other prep for the class, which met every Wednesday morning. Chris, what I would describe as probably not your average guy who was in the prison, and I'll explain. If you've ever been in a prison, you might understand this. He was a 25-year-old, blonde hair, blue eyes, Swedish guy from northern Minnesota, soft-spoken, and the kindest heart I think I've ever seen in anybody. He was also working on his MDiv. He was very interested in theology. And so he was working on his MDiv, he's teaching these Franciscan spirituality courses, and he did all these leadership things around faith and spirituality in the prison. So, as with most of the inmates, I didn't know the nature of the crimes that put them in there, and I didn't want them to know. I don't want them to know my darkest secrets, and I don't need to know theirs. I could assume, of course, that being a maximum security prison, and the fact that Chris was in for a lifetime, It was something probably pretty serious. The only thing Chris has also mentioned, and he mentioned this many times, is the reason why he did all these things, the reason why he was getting his MDiv. He would always say, I'm trying to make up to the victims for what I did. Every part of his being was trying to make up for whatever he did. No, I'm not going to lie, I was curious, but I didn't want to know. Well, one weekend, I was visiting my parents, and we were watching a Dateline episode. It was a horrific story. A story of a murder that had happened in North Dakota, where a grandma, grandpa, a mom, and a young daughter, and the family dog had been killed. It was horrific. The nature of the crime, and of course being on Dateline, was sensationalized. The scenes were bloody. They were killed by an axe. The crime scene photos were horrific. The description of what I call a massacre was horrific. All of it just horrific. And as we continued to watch it, I'll never forget this moment. Because the most horrific part to me was this. The killer had been caught and charged with murder. And this was horrific, horrific, horrific. All of a sudden on this TV, there pops Chris's face. Chris, the man that I had been working with for 1.5 years, he was the guy that was caught. He was the one that did this absolutely horrific, evil, evil thing. I couldn't unsee what I just saw. I couldn't unsee what I just saw, and I wish I would have been able to. I was physically sick. So from that Saturday, of course, I called the chaplain at the prison right away, and I told her about it, and the first thing she said was, do not ever watch those shows when you're working in the prison. And I trust me, I will never do it again. So that entire weekend, I was just sick, thinking, on Monday, I have to go see this man, as I have done every Monday for the last 1.5 years. And all I kept seeing were the visual that I saw on the TV over and over again. How would I react when I saw him? Would I even be able to talk to him? Would I even be able to get close to him? How would I ever be able to work with him or not treat him differently? Oh, how I wanted to quit ministry work. Well, as a former professor of mine in undergrad said, God's on the loose. The mystery of grace is always there. We just got to be open to it, and it will happen. As I was driving from my parents' home in Wisconsin to meet with Chris in Stillwater, I was listening to a podcast, as I often do, from the College of St. Benedict, the CSJs. I am kind of a church geek, but anyway. And it's a random podcast, so whatever's on is on. And it was one of the CSJs talking about her experience in working in the L'Arche community with a man named Henry Nouwen. And the entire podcast was about his book and his belief in Life of the Beloved. Life of the Beloved, a book I'd read before, a man I'd met. And I thought, well, shoot. I like the idea of the beloved, but how am I supposed to see Chris as the beloved? How am I supposed to see Chris as the beloved? And everything got gray and complicated, and I thought, well, it's easy to see beloved, and I like the idea of it, and I like good quotes about beloved, and I can do sermon. But now I'm faced with something that was so incredibly evil, that tore me up inside, so painfully and so deep. How am I supposed to then see this? The life of the beloved, God's beloved in Chris. I was both thankful and resentful that that sermon or that podcast was on. But it was a good reminder to me, of what God calls us, of what Jesus says to us, that each one of us as the beloved is the beloved. And I held on to that. I held on to this book, Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen, and I had that podcast, and I'm writing scribbles down on a piece of paper, and I just hung on to it as if it was my, lifeboat. When I went into the prison, I saw Chris. And in my head, I kept seeing Henry Nouwen saying, the life of the beloved, life of the beloved. And I am so grateful for the grace of God and the love of God that I saw his humanness, that I saw the guy that I had come to work with who was trying to change his life around, that I still saw the heart, the beloved heart that God gave him, long before anybody else was around, long before he lived his life, before he was even created. I also did see those scenes of that horrific massacre at times. And that was a little bit of a challenge, but I never, ever treated Chris differently, as much as I wanted to ask him and just say, why? I kept on having that mantra. If I have to claim myself as the beloved, then I need to see him as beloved. And he was. I don't understand the senselessness and the evil of what happened, but I know his heart. And I am thankful to God's love for that, and Henry Nouwen, and the CSJ podcast. And whenever I start to think, what does it mean to treat other people as they are the beloved, as I claim my own belovedness, I'm reminded of Chris. That we are not what we do, we are not what we have, and we are not who others say who we are. In a world now that is so divided, there is so much violence, some of it horrific. In our own helplessness to make a difference, to feel some sense of peace or some sense of purpose of who God is calling us to be and who we are supposed to, what are we supposed to do? Well, we might not be able to change the entire world or do massive, big peace movements. I do think that there are things that we can do and that we are called to do. As God's beloved, there's a responsibility. And we must do what we can to give the gift of our belovedness to other people so that they can see themselves as beloved, even if it is just one person at a time. Helping others to see that they are beloved too, reminding them of who they are. Reminding them of who they are. Friends, you are the beloved. I am the beloved. This is a beloved community. And it is in the beloved community where we see the impact of God's love being proclaimed to one another, well beyond these church doors, well beyond just Minneapolis, St. Paul, but in everybody that we encounter. I want to close with a poem by John Rodell. I cannot make the world be peaceful. I can't stall tanks from roaring down roads. I can't prevent children from having to hide in bunkers. I can't keep a madman from creating heartbreaking headlines. I cannot convince the news to stop turning war into a video game. I cannot silence the sounds of bombs tearing neighborhoods apart. I cannot turn a guided missile into a bouquet of flowers. I cannot make a warmonger have an ounce of empathy. I cannot convince diplomats to quit playing truth and dare. I cannot deflect a sniper's bullet from turning a wife into a widow. And I cannot stave off a schoolyard being reduced to ash and rubble. I cannot do any of that. The only thing I can do, that I must do, is love the next person I encounter without any conditions or strings, to love my neighbor so fearlessly that it starts a ripple that stretches from one horizon to the next. I cannot force peace on the world, but I can become a force of peace in the world, because sometimes all that might take is a single lit candle in the darkness to start a movement. O Spirit, let us each be the candle of comfort in the world. Let us burn with peace. Let our belovedness shine. Let our belovedness shine. Let our belovedness shine. Amen.